Director of Responsible AI at the Coalition for Health AI, and I'll chat a little bit about what we do, but just a little bit of background on me because I did not start in the AI space. I'm actually a clinical psychologist by training. And a lot of the research I did in academia was focused on computational neuroscience and behavioral neuroscience. And I actually studied how people make decisions under uncertainty, which, like, strangely is now important in the context of AI and how people use AI. Um, but I sort of came at this from a very different space. I moved from academia into industry as a behavioral scientist and behavioral designer focused in machine learning and AI, and then transitioned to this role. So in my previous role, I actually worked very closely with the Coalition for Health AI as part of their pre them becoming a nonprofit. They were just a coalition of the willing academic and medical centers and other organizations that came together. And I led the Fairness, Bias, and Equity work group at the time. And so that work that we did while I was at my previous job ended up becoming what is now the Responsible AI Guide that we've published. So that was now published, I think, back in 2022, three, maybe something like that, quite a while ago. Maybe a little later. But anyhow, so Coalition for Health AI is a nonprofit. We are a member-driven nonprofit, and we focus uh, on responsible AI in healthcare. And it's a sort of broad stakeholder ecosystem. So we have large health care delivery representation, but we also have developers of health AI solutions. We have trade organizations for various uh, companies like, or specialties, for example, in the healthcare space, like CMSS is a member, for example. And so we have sort of a wide range. We have payer members, we have patient advocacy groups that work closely with us. We have the National Association for Community Health Centers, which is sort of a very different space and set of resourcing. So I'm super, super privileged because I think the shift from academia to this space has meant that it's not about me, it's about everyone else, which is really great because I get to learn from the expertise of the people that I work with. I get to listen to the different perspectives and weirdly apply some of my clinical skills to the consensus building process because people don't always agree, and that's part of it. So there is a huge opportunity in healthcare for AI. And not just in the health care delivery side or the research side, but also this is an area that consumers like you and I, people who are patients, um, are now more empowered with AI in many ways. So there's a lot of opportunities. I know ChatGPT just released their GPT Health and GPT Healthcare. So both of these things gives more sort of power to the patient, to the consumer, but it also provides a lot of opportunity for a healthcare system that is very overburdened, under-resourced, struggles to provide care to all the people who need it in a timely way. And so this is where I think AI, the opportunity for AI lives, reducing some of that clinician administrative operational burden, protecting workforce turnover, which is huge, and a huge cost and burden on the healthcare system as well. Being able to identify rising risk patients, helping to optimize resource allocation, given that resources are limited, who needs what and when, things like revenue cycle management. And then you all being a cancer center, I think patient engagement and care navigation become so much more important, and AI is also being used in this space as well, especially when patients are seeing multiple providers for multiple issues, being able to sort of integrate some of that into a space and have more of a holistic perspective on the patient. And it can also help with admin things like quality reporting, which everyone loves, all the paperwork that goes along with those things. So there's a lot of opportunity, but all technology and really all processes can be used for good and they can be used for not so good. And sometimes we don't even know why the not so good happens, not at least not up front. So it's good to go into this stuff with some reasonable awareness and sort of be very conscious about how we go through this process. So AI does have the potential to scale existing biases that we already see in healthcare because it relies on data. If there are biases in data or incompleteness in data or data quality issues, um, there is a potential to sort of perpetuate those at a much larger scale than might have happened previously. Uh, there's also change management challenges with any new technology. And this isn't just new technology. It could be like, we are now going to see patients in this waiting room, and someone's going to be like, we didn't used to do it this way, and that's not how we've done it. And so, really, with any change, there needs to be an understanding that not everybody is ready for that change. And how do we get workforce and stakeholders ready for those changes as they come? Both because it impacts how people use things and whether they use things, and because it can increase risks if people don't know what the risks are and how to appropriately mitigate them. There's also quite a bit of resource differentiation across organizations. So there's quite a bit of infrastructure needed for effective and responsible AI implementation and use. Not everybody can ask the questions of like, how well does this work? Um, does it work in my setting? Do we have the resources to run a pilot, for example? And so what we don't want is to widen that digital divide and make AI accessible to some people and not to others. And we also don't want to make it so that some populations and some subgroups are more at risk because they don't have the resources to effectively evaluate these solutions, while others are at lower risk. So we really want to innovate and stay current and help our challenging, burdened system. But we also want to minimize harm. And that's a big thing, especially in healthcare. So we can think about autonomous vehicles using AI and all these other technologies using AI. But in healthcare, we have this sort of ethics of doing no harm that is very strong underlying basis. And doing no harm to patients is one thing, but also to the providers and staff, other staff that are working in the system, and for the institution itself, right? So what we don't often think about is like, what is the impact? And if this institution is already struggling with finances, money, resourcing, to purchase a technology, implement a technology, and have nobody use it or use it poorly, and it just sits there, right? So that is also a harm. It is a cost to a system that is trying to help people and can't then do it because there's other things that come in. So consensus matters in this space because we have a lot of fragmented guidance. There is some regulatory guidance out there, but it's not, it's sort of in a state of flux. There's some regulation that's increasing, some that's decreasing. Um, and independent of regulation, what we're hearing from a lot of stakeholders in this space is that people want to be able to trust AI in healthcare. And what that means needs to we all need to kind of be speaking the same language across clinicians, researchers, patients, vendors. What do we mean when we say AI is responsible? What do we mean when we say it is fair or it is transparent? And I think while we may not all define it the same way, we should at least know how different people are defining it and where we agree. And so I think that's a big part of what I do in my day to day. So this is just an example of our three-phase consensus process. So in the first iteration of the work we did with the Responsible AI Guide, that took a very, very long time. We used a Delphi-based consensus method. And it was a lot more of an academic exercise, which, as we know, like takes time. We were doing the work to be able to publish the work as well. But we realized very quickly that we needed to be way more agile than that, especially given the pace at which some of this stuff happens, and is happening. So the way we usually approach this, and I'll give you an example from, we have use case specific work groups that work to develop best practices and testing and evaluation frameworks for health AI and for different use cases within health AI. So in those work groups, we often have facilitated discussion. We have these things called tales from the trenches, which are developers, implementers, researchers presenting on their sort of implementation of the use case, their development of the use case, and what sort of factors they kept in mind as it relates to principles of responsible AI. And I'll talk about what some of those are in a minute. And we record all of these discussions and conversations and presentations. And from that, we pull out what we think are best practice statements and their best current practices. And I say that because we need a lot more evidence of what is best, but they are what people are doing that works now. And that is what we would consider a best practice. But there needs to be more research over time as new data comes out. So they're starting to do some of this with like ambient AI technology to be able to actually do full case studies or look at the evidence over time. But until we have enough people using it for a long enough period of time, it's hard to sort of figure out what is best. We get these best practice statements, we put them in anonymous surveys, and we ask work group members to vote. Should we include this best practice statement in the final best practice guide or say testing evaluation framework? Should we exclude it, or should we change some of the language and include it? So if at least 2/3 of the voters select include, we will include it in the final product. That is kind of our definition of we've reached consensus, because we will not get 100% agreement on anything. Some things do, some items do, but most of the time we don't get 100%. If folks want to revise the statement, we will flag that for revision. We will make the revision. We'll show them the old statement, the new statement. We get a final vote on that. Should we include or exclude? We no longer then include the option to revise again, because otherwise we'll be revising forever. And then finally, for any item that has a lot of variance in response or sort of greater than 25% vote exclude, and some are wanting to change the language, and some percentage say, and we haven't hit that 2/3, we will address these high disagreement statements. So we'll have facilitated discussion, talk about what the conflicting views are, re-vote via live vote. And if we hit that 2/3, great, we'll include it. If not, we exclude it, because that's just something we can't agree on at this point in time. Maybe we need more evidence, maybe beliefs widely differ, and that's okay. So we're very clear in the products that we put out where we use consensus and where we might not. So some products that we have, like we had this transparency legislative report that our policy work group put out, that was not consensus based, because it was literally like a review of what bills are out in the world focused on AI and transparency. But for things like our responsible AI guide, which was that early work, these use case specific best practice guides, we developed risk categorization tools that I'll talk about, and the governance playbooks that we are currently developing. All of these are using some version of this consensus process. Any questions? I don't have to speak for the whole time before folks ask questions. Any questions so far?
I have a question,
Yeah.
which is like, is this for an institution to develop their AI policy? Is that kind of what we're talking about, or like to improve upon it?
Yeah, so the use case specific best practice guides are the audience for those are developers and implementers of health AI solutions. And so we will have some best practices that speak to like how might you best make this tool useful and usable? For example, as a developer, how might you like what's important in terms of transparency? Like for the chat, for like a health advice chatbot, disclosure is really important that people know that they're talking to a chatbot and not a real person. So these are sort of the kinds of things. And then for implementers, it might be here's the kind of transparency that clinicians need for this kind of solution, or here are the technicals, but to some degree, for some of these things, folks are getting to the technical level of like, uh, how do you, like, we're right now, we're kicking off an agentic work group, and one of the questions they're going to be asking is like, how do you do, agent to agent implementation, and how do you know, those kinds of pieces uh, of the process. So really, sometimes it's use case dependent, but the audience is usually developers and implementers of those solutions. For things like the governance playbook, that will be speaking more towards, and that's what I'm going to go into more detail on right now, is the governance playbooks. They will focus on things like what should be included in an AI policy, what kind of organizational structure is needed to effectively and responsibly implement health AI and govern it over time. Um, so some of that differs based on the audience for the solution. Does that answer your question? Okay, so we just released 4 best practice guides for these specific use cases. We have 4 new use cases that we're starting for quarter 1 and 2, so first half of 2026. But we released clinical decision support, EHR info retrieval, general health advice chatbot, which is more of a direct to consumer solution, and then AI supported prior authorization criteria matching. So this is like, how do once payers get your prior authorization requests match the evidence to use AI to match evidence to actual criteria, and what's sort of the best practices there. And I'll talk more about the risk categorization tool. We did an AI governance workshop. We used a very similar consensus process to ask the question of like, what kinds of governance controls are must-haves versus nice-to-haves when it comes to AI governance. This is really, the goal was to get at like, what is something that everybody can do and not just the large institutions or just the small institutions, and what's really needed, uh, irrespective of size and resourcing. So I'm going to go further into this governance piece because I think governance matters a lot. It helps us to align AI or really any digital technology with the mission, ethics, compliance of our institutions. It helps to develop processes, design processes that will minimize harm, reduce bias and system level risks. It can help to build trust and clarity and accountability across the teams so that everybody knows like this is what I'm responsible for, this is what I'm not responsible for, and who is responsible for the other stuff. And it ensures that money and time spent is intentional and not wasteful. I think if we had the habit of doing more of this kind of thing earlier on in healthcare, there's a lot of things that we might have sunsetted long, long time ago. There's, technology that's out there that's 3 people are using that isn't really that effective. And so how do we save time and resources that we really don't have a lot of to begin with? So when I say responsible AI, and as an organization, you'll see different versions of these principles in the literature, but generally we believe that AI should be useful, usable, and efficacious. It should do what it says it's going to do and be effectively able to be used to do that thing. It should be fair and sort of have bias that is mitigated. It should be transparent, and what transparency means is quite different for different people. So transparent, what needs to be transparent and for whom. It needs to be secure and private. Obviously, in healthcare, we have a duty to protect health data. And hopefully in all sectors they have that duty, but that's not always the case. And then it should be safe and minimize harm. And when we started thinking about these principles, we really wanted to apply them across the AI life cycle. So we wanted folks to start thinking about these things at the stage of defining their problem and planning it, that like very early stage when you're like, I have something that AI could help. Um, or could AI help this something that I have, which is really how we should be thinking about it. We should be starting with the problem and then asking the question, is AI a good solution for this or not? And that very early stage, we wanted folks to think about how do you engage the right stakeholders early on to really understand whether this is a good solution, whether it will be easily adopted, or what might be needed to actually implement it, et cetera, to gather those sort of business requirements, assess for feasibility and impact, and make a decision. Are we going to procure this solution? Are we going to build this solution with our research colleagues? Are we going to partner with a developer to co-build the solution? So how do folks want to do that? So that's like stage one. And we really wanted people to be thinking about responsible AI at that stage, not after the fact when you've gotten your solution and you're already in it and you've spent hundreds and thousands of dollars. Like that's a little too late, in my opinion. And in the opinion of many others that have reached consensus on this. Um, and then, of course, there's the design of the AI system and the engineering of that AI solution, which happens either at the developer's level, if the developer is external to your institution, or might be happening at your institution. And then there's some assessment, some sort of like silent assessment phase. This is before it ever touches a real patient, but you're using kind of retrospective data to understand, like, does this work? But for all AI solutions, when feasible, it's important to have a pilot phase where it touches some group of data. You look to see whether it does what it says it does, um, and whether there's acceptability and adoptability in that space. And then hopefully that from that you will move into deploying and monitoring that solution over time. And the monitoring piece is also particularly important because AI systems can drift, and I don't need to tell you all this, but data can drift, model performance can drift, bias performance can drift. All of a sudden you might have a couple patients that have never been in your data pool and now are in your data pool and the model does not work for them. So it's just good to know how these things shift over time and when it's important to, at what thresholds you take a look and see if something is going on with either the data or the model. So when we think about governance, what we actually did was we started with a industry standard, an ISO standard, an international standard there, focused on AI management systems. And we took the sort of sections in that and we took the controls that were recommended. That's part of what we presented in our workshop to gain consensus over. So which of these controls make sense in healthcare and are must-haves versus nice-to-haves. And to be fair, there's a lot of elements of governance that are already happening in institutions. So the goal here is not to reinvent the wheel. The goal is to adapt or modify existing processes so that they can sort of morph when they need to and apply it to AI versus any other digital technology that you might have. So these are the four buckets I'm going to talk about. And then I won't go into too much detail. I'll send over these slides if you folks want to look at them. But for the first piece is the important thing is to have a organizational policy. And these don't need to be long. So I kind of separate policies from like SOPs or like how you're doing something from like what it is that you're doing. So in an AI policy, and this is information we've seen across several institutions that have like shared their policies with us, we consistently see that there's some purpose and scope, there's some level of definition of what do we mean by AI or AI governance, or what solutions fall under AI governance versus don't. So some people will say anything that is clinical falls under an AI governance process, and the administrative stuff has a different process. Um, so just identifying what that scope is, like maybe the research things don't really go through governance, but the actual applied solutions do. Um, and think of this as like your IRB charter, basically. So what are the definitions? When do tools require governance? Who's involved in that governance committee? And then what are the procedures and processes that will be included that they will then address? And so for organizational structure, this is where you really want to define like who is doing what across this space. So think of this as like your IRB board um, there, and like who is doing which piece, who's doing compliance, who's doing the IT work or the data work. And it may be one person that has multiple skills, which is often the case at smaller institutions, or it may be several people that each have their own skills. Sometimes this you see this at larger institutions. And there should be some process for risk reporting, and like if an issue comes up, who needs to be told, how is it dealt with, and those sorts of processes. Then we have organizational resources that kind of need to be documented and defined. So many institutions are not aware of where AI is when they start out in this process, are not aware where AI is being used. I've given talks at some community primary care associations where um, the IT lead found out that providers were using like an app, ambient app, on their phones to record sessions and do their notes. And it was nothing that had been approved by the department, that hadn't been looked at by the department, obviously. And there's like sensitive patient information that's going into it and being recorded. Um, but I often say, like, especially in the beginning, it's important to have some grace. Like, if there are no rules, there are no rules. I didn't break any. Nobody told me not to do it. So um, it's good to be able to create that openness for people to share, like, yeah, these are the kinds of AI tools that I use in my day to day, whether you're a researcher, a teacher, clinician, and what are the systems that might use AI? So there's also AI embedded in a lot of devices that would often falls under FDA approval. But it's just good to know that you have them so that you can be aware if like the underlying AI model is updated, to do an extra check maybe that quarter or that year to make sure that it's working as it was supposed to be. Um, Data resources are important to document. Data is king or queen, as we say in the AI space. And it's really important as an asset. So models can't be developed without data. They also cannot run without data. And having data in usable formats, in data lakes where multiple sources of data can be accessed, this is really, really important from an infrastructure perspective. And this area actually becomes quite a bit of a debate across different healthcare delivery organizations of like, what are the ethics of monetizing and using data as an asset, right? In healthcare, especially because typically we don't think about that. We don't want to do that. We want to stay far away from that. But it is a source of revenue, and it is particularly a source of revenue when you're thinking about it can provide some leverage when you're thinking about implementing solutions or talking with vendors who are newly developing a solution, and you have maybe very unique data, like say specific cancer type that your site has a really, really great data set for. How can we leverage that data in a positive way and still emphasize the responsible use of it, privacy, security, and all of those things that are really important. But there is quite a bit of debate on whether some people think it's very icky. Others say, well, they're going to monetize it anyway, so we might as well get a piece of the pie. This is sort of the debate. These are the conversations we have in a lot of our work group meetings that come up. Tooling and computing resources. What do you have? What do you need? It's important to document this because eventually, if you want AI, then there needs to be a conversation with whoever holds the purse strings about how you might need more computing resources in order to implement that. What is the value of having this AI solution, and is it worth the extra added costs and environmental impact and all that other stuff that goes on? And then do you have the appropriate staff roles and competencies within your workforce? So who is there that can sort of be upskilled, and what additional staff might be needed to ensure that this can be effectively implemented? Any questions so far? Okay. The last sort of section is organizational processes, and it has all these subdomains. So responsible life cycle management and use is the governance committee operationalizing. How do you align at your organization? How do you define and operationalize the principles of responsible AI? So what does transparency mean for your organization? What does usefulness, usability mean for your organization? And part of the work that we're doing is trying to align people on these definitions so that we're all speaking that same language, but context will impact things. So we've worked with some Catholic health systems that have additional principles that they want to integrate into their sort of AI governance process that are more faith-based. And so they're able to figure out how to operationalize those for their particular organization. Also defining requirements across the life cycle stages. What is requirements for vendors? What do they need to provide you? How do they need to be transparent with you? Versus what are your responsibilities for monitoring, for, all of those pieces. And some of this can be shared responsibilities, right? So sometimes vendors will provide monitoring as part of their solution. And the same can be true for internally developed solutions. You might have embedded monitoring. For others, you may have to figure out how to actually monitor a solution, and that may impact the kind of decision you make about which tool to adopt, et cetera. And then figuring out how to log events for different use cases. So for example, ambient scribes have a risk of automation bias. So the provider may not even read the note that is created, and they may just sign it. I mean, they're supposed to read it, but they may just sign it every single time. So you could think about, okay, if we want to monitor for that, maybe we should look at time spent in note, or number of edits made or something. And if you notice that there are a set of users or subset of users that are spending 0.1 seconds in a note, you might want to retrain them or have a conversation with them about the value and the risk of, doing not reading the notes, and how that might really impact the patient's chart down the line if something is incorrect or inaccurate, right? So figuring out what to log and how to monitor those, and what will trigger kind of we got to do something. And then there's risk and impact assessment. So as solutions come to you, as vendors come to you and say, we have the best thing for this problem that you have or didn't even know you had, how do you evaluate the risk of that solution? So one of the things that we've been doing, we just released our first risk tool last October. This is focused on patient life and safety. And what we tried to do, it's a very flexible tool. So the goal is not to tell people, like, at the end of it, this tool is good or this tool is bad. Or the solution is good or the solution is bad. What it tries to do is have people at least ask the questions that they need to, and it operationalizes what low, medium, and high risk look like in these subdomains. So the modifiers that we had for this tool are listed here. So people thought that patient life and safety would be impacted by the proximity of the impact of that AI solution on patients, whether there's a human in the loop, what the consequences of failure are, how vulnerable the patient population the solutions being used on are, et cetera. And I'll give a couple concrete examples of what some of the modifiers look like. So I want you all to take a second to just like read this use case. Okay, all good. All right, so with that first question of distance from patient, how physically or operationally close is the AI solution to the patient? So this is how we operationalize what low, medium, and high would be. And most folks, when we actually stress tested this tool in our work group, because not only did we get consensus on what modifiers and what low, medium, high risk should be, but we also stress tested it with solutions, various solutions around in the world. Most people said medium risk for this one because it has indirect impact. Obviously, it can impact access to care. If somebody who needs urgent appointment does not get an urgent appointment, that's potentially problematic for their health. And obviously, scheduling is included as an example here. Transportation could be another thing. So most people said medium. Here is an example from the human in the loop question. So this is the extent to which there is human oversight in reviewing, verifying, or overriding the AI solution. And if you remember in the description, it says that a human confirms the appointment once scheduled all the time. So it would be like tentatively scheduled, and then the scheduler would go in the next day. And just to demonstrate, I mean, this is one really good demonstration or example of how an operational administrative workflow can change because there's now an AI solution. So normally what would happen is the job of the scheduler is to call the patient, schedule the appointment, right? If the scheduling software is doing that, there is maybe no need to do that first. The workflow then shifts to the scheduling assistant's job is now to review the scheduling that was done and make sure that it is appropriate for that patient, given their presenting problem, given what they're, going in for. And then they might need to call them to confirm or modify if there's any need. So their job now is to catch the issues rather than make the initial decision. Um, so, and this is great because scheduling, like we don't have enough people to be doing this, honestly, on a day-to-day basis. People call after hours, they can't get to a scheduler. So there is value. And a lot of people fear like my job will be taken from me. But it's like if there were even 10 more of you and you all worked around the clock, there'd still be a need for extra somebody to be there when there's no human to take the calls. Okay, and then the last one. So for this one, most people said low. They said, the AI solution is always reviewed by a relevant expert before any action is taken. And then the data transparency one. So this is the clarity, completeness, and accessibility of the data sources, data sets used to train and validate the AI solution. So from the description alone, we cannot answer this question. And when I do this in live audiences, I have people raise their hand, like, do you think it's low, medium, and high? And they will say, I don't know. And then I say, trick question. That's fun for me. So the reason I do this question is to demonstrate that the pitch that we are given often when it comes to a solution does not give us all the information about that solution that we need to make a safe and ethical decision. So we've developed a model card that does not have to be publicly posted. The goal of this model card was to improve and streamline that procurement process. So if you have 4 different ambient solutions coming to you and saying, we have the best thing, it's easier to compare 4 different model cards than it is and ask additional questions from that base than it is to have each person give you their little packet of information. So the model card is as such, it includes basic information about the known risks, limitations, what is the intended use, what is the workflow, targeted patient population, where shouldn't you use this, what kind of data was used to train this model. And some people, some vendors don't want to share this information publicly, but they might share this information privately for an organization that they are hoping will buy their solution. And they don't need to go into details of like, the level of detail we might expect from a research paper, but they should say like, there is no pediatric data in this data. It's all adults between the ages of 18 and 64. So we have no peds and we have nobody above 64. And that's important for you to know if the only population you work with is patients between 65 and 85, and you're trying to use a solution on them, right? Then you might need to ask the question of, okay, well, we might need to do additional piloting to see if this generalizes. We might need to tune this model with our own data. Other things might need to happen. The model card also includes a section on metrics. This is also some of the information that folks don't necessarily want to publicly share, but they might privately share with their potential purchasers. So this would be like, how did you measure usefulness, usability, efficacy? How did you look at fairness at all? And it might not always be relevant, but for some solutions, these will be relevant. And then how did you test for safety and reliability? So that's just one tool that we have available. We're actually developing a registry for vendors to put their completed model cards up there with whatever information they want to make public, and the rest of it could be viewable sort of privately from health systems that are interested in that kind of a solution. They can log in as as health systems and view it. The next sort of SOP is, how is data used and managed in the context of AI? So this needs to be defined for every organization. And this is important because you want to know how the data is being used, where is it going, what form does it need to be in for this model to actually work properly? So does it need to be in DICOM form if it's a radiology image, or does it need to be further processed, right? Like that's just these kinds of questions that need to be asked. And it's important, this may not be relevant to you all here, but for the folks who care about like the compliance side of things, when you're purchasing solutions, it's important to know what kind of data is going into this. Is it going to be PHI, which then you need like a business associate agreement, and you need to make sure there's HIPAA compliance and all of those things, or that it's a HIPAA exception, like for research, certain research purposes. Is it a limited data set, which is like anything that's de-identified except for things like city, date of birth, zip code? That might need a data use agreement or a HIPAA exception. And then finally, is it fully de-identified? And if so, how was it de-identified? And that would still need some sort of data use agreement in place. So we're also working on, so this will be released sometime in the next couple months. A risk tool similar to what I was presenting for patient life and safety, but focused on data and technology risk. And so how is the use of sensitive data for this particular solution? How accurate and complete is the data? What are the model security vulnerabilities? And this is going to be really important for like the data privacy, security, and IT folks to like really get into and look at. Okay, and then finally we have feedback and training. So with any solution, I talked about the change management component and the importance of that, but how are organizations going about defining what the feedback pipelines processes are? So how can a user let you know as a governance team that the solution is like crap and it doesn't work the way it's supposed to, and what needs might exist there. How does the vendor communicate with you if there are updates to a solution that require further testing? How does a patient communicate with you if they interacted with like a chatbot on your website and it didn't work properly? So what are those reporting pathways and who are the responsible parties there? What are the kinds of incidents? So there's already patient safety organizations that exist out in the world, and there are patient safety reporting processes. Um, some organizations are adding an AI tag to that patient reporting process. So if an incident occurs, a safety incident occurs, and AI was used in that care at any point, um, to be able to at least mark, yes, it was used or no, it wasn't, so that appropriate root cause analysis can be done to see if it was because the AI or because of something else. Um, what else? And then user training. So most institutions agree that use case specific training must be done. Some organizations say a nice to have is that you just have more AI literacy across the institution, which you all are doing a very good job of. So that's sort of depending on resourcing and timing, right? Not all organizations have the time to be doing all hands AI literacy education. Nobody wants to add more training to the tons and tons of training people already have to do. But at the very least, there needs to be use case specific training. Okay, so what our next steps are is for our governance work, we've defined the sort of baseline controls. Over the next 4 months, we are convening all members that are interested in helping to co-develop these playbooks. So things that we want to do is add examples of how different organizations, how different sized institutions are actually going about doing these things. Because while the what might be shared, the how may be different, and that's okay. I think it's important, especially at this stage, to have that flexibility so that people are not further burdened. Um, we also want to build out context for each of these controls. So what does that look like? What is the evidence to support the value of this kind of thing versus not? And we want to develop resources to really help people, like guide people through this. So can we develop an AI policy template? Can we develop checklists for as you're going through your organizational structure process, knowing what to check off and what to sort of make sure to cover? So we're doing 3-week sprints, each one focused on one of these domains or subdomains. We'll then have drafts that our advisory board and our members will have 4 weeks to give feedback on, incorporate that feedback. Then we publicly release it, and we have a public feedback period. So there's a lot of work that goes into this, but hopefully what comes out of this is something that we can all get behind and use. Any questions?
Thank you so much. This was really great. You covered a lot of stuff, and it was I really liked some of the examples that you gave because everybody kind of then thinks through their own answers and compares with what you suggest, and especially the point where sometimes the information may not be present, and then the onus is on the organization to go back and ask the vendor for it, right? So that was awesome. I have a couple of questions while others are thinking of their questions. One is where to find this information. I did put the top level link in chat,
Mhm.
but then you mentioned the responsible AI guide, which I saw in
Yeah.
one place, and I saw the model cards in another place. But is there one single place where most of your resources are they available?
Sadly, yeah, sadly, no. But what we are doing is, so I'll share the links for all of these things in the chat. No, we are redoing our website so that we can, in fact, do this. So this use case specific page, So if you go to our work and you go to use case specific, if you on the side, there will be tabs and you can see like what work groups are active. So those won't have products out, but you can see what's going on. You can see what's upcoming. And then anything that says public feedback is all completed. And we do gather ongoing feedback for a lot of these things. We treat it like it's a software product that might have bugs because we know that the landscape is shifting very quickly. And so as new evidence comes out, we want people to submit an issue and say, hey, like this new paper says the opposite of what you said was a best practice, and here's some evidence for that. So that's one place to look. And if you click on that and there's output for each of the use cases, there'll be an output and it'll link to the best practice guide and the testing and evaluation frameworks. The cross-cutting work group page will have so if you go to the side tab and it'll say like risk categorization, V1 of that tool is up there. AI governance, eventually we've released like a joint guidance with the Joint Commission that is just very high level principles. That's on there. And then eventually our playbooks will be on there as well. Model card is under our work as well. I'll put that link in the chat. Oops. I broke something.
Yes. Thank you for that. Yeah, I did find the resources, but they're kind of scattered right now. So I'm really glad that you're rebuilding, because I think a lot of organizations who are going to the website, it might be convenient for them to have it in one place. And the flip side of that question then was, if people want to participate more in the work that you're doing and people have expertise, like people on this call, right? Like a lot of people are doing great work and have a lot of experience. So how might they participate in this work?
Yeah, so on our website, there's like a member form. You can join as an individual contributor. So even if like right now, Fred Hutch, I don't think is an organizational member. So either as an organization, there are some organizations that are members at that level, and then anybody can participate. But if you are wanting to participate on your own, there's no cost for that. Just when you fill out that member form, select patient advocate or individual contributor, and that way you can participate as an individual. You can also email me or Anthony. So that's merage@chai.org or Anthony@chai.org. Anthony is our program manager. You will probably see him or me in any and all work groups that we have. So yeah, email us. You can see the upcoming work groups. So if any of those look good to you, let us know. Happy to loop you in. One is focused on clinical trials, the use of clinical AI in clinical trial recruitment and retention. There's agentic, there's ambient, and there is something else. Mental health chatbot, which is more direct to consumer. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any last questions in the last minute?
There's a question in the chat. Is there any regulation or regulatory body that oversees the quality of data sets used to train models? No, but there are quite a few frameworks out there, especially for like the use of, let me see, I think like Tripod is one example. Data quality. So there's quite a few. If you want to email me, I can send you the list, but there's quite a few frameworks out there, and that kind of talk about what data quality should look like. And some of that's also use case specific as well.
Thank you, Sujata, for your question. Anything else? Okay, we are at time.
All right.
Thank you so much again for coming and talking to us. This was really great, and thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And I'll put if anyone has any questions, Miraj has already shared her email address, so please feel free to reach out. And I'm also very happy to facilitate any further conversations. Thank you very much. Next time, since I
Thank you.
didn't have my slides in the earlier, our next speaker will be Nawar Shara, Dr. Nawar Shara, who is the chief of AI at MedStar and Georgetown. I got to know her through this Aim Ahead work, which is at the intersection of AI and health equity. And this will also be in the second week of February, just to accommodate speaker schedule. So I'll change the meeting that's on calendar. By default, it's on the first Thursday. So I'll move it to second Thursday, and I'll put up the post and share with all of you. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining. And once again, happy 2026. Bye.